All right, good morning, everyone. This is Mark Molina, CEO, Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. This morning, we are going to be interviewing Meryln Hough, Director of Lane Regional Protection Agency, or otherwise known as LRAPA. And we have with us as well Mysti, who's a community organizer and activist around the issues of climate change and pollution. She's also a board member for LRAPA, but she's not here in that capacity. She's here to speak about her participation in this area, this movement. And I've asked them to be with me today because we have seen for ourselves now with our eyes, not just in our community, but in the world, the positive effects of rapid decrease of pollution, 50% or more in many major cities and geographical regions. Just the Himalayas, now they are seen once again from below in the streets of their cities there, because there has been a lot less pollution. And I've asked them here today because I believe we have a responsibility to be stewards of our, not just our society, but our natural resources and what that means long-term for the earth that we have. So with that being said, Meryln, welcome. Mysti, welcome. Thank you for your willingness to have a conversation with me today. Thank you both very much. Meryln has been in this line of work since 1976. He has years of experience and expertise. He has been in charge of LRAPA since 2005. Mysti has been involved and concerned about the climate since she was 12 years old as a member of Greenpeace and the Jacques Cousteau Society. She says her most important role, though, is that of a mom. And this is why she is highly involved in the preservation of our natural resources in the capacity that she serves. So let's start, Meryln, with you. Just give an introduction to those that will be listening who do not know you.
Okay, as you mentioned, I've been involved in this field for a long period of time. Some other environmental work besides, but primarily air pollution control over the years. And it's really been a privilege to work at LRAPA for the last 15 years or so as director there.
Very good. Mysti, let's tell our viewers and listeners something about yourself.
Well, something about myself. I'm a full-time student at the University of Oregon, and I'm studying environmental studies. Hopefully we'll graduate soon. My father is an enrolled member of the Crow tribe of Montana, and my mom is a longtime activist, so I think I just naturally fell into activism as something that was very important to be involved in my community. And if anybody's oppressed, then I feel oppressed. So I definitely take those things seriously.
Very good.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I would like to also add that Mysti has gone through a 3-day training on climate reality, sponsored by former Vice President Al Gore. And since I've known Mysti, she's been very concerned about environmental justice and environmental causes. And I've asked the both of you today, I am not an anti-fossil fuel guy, but that doesn't mean but I do believe, and I don't necessarily understand what it means what's the best way to be a positive steward of our natural resources. I believe there's ways we can do that by increasing efficiency of anything that burns a fossil fuel. But what has really shaken what I believe is seeing all these photos from all over the world of how the natural state of things is being restored with the change of the limited use of fossil fuels. Maybe it's due to limited movement, but that notwithstanding, I have been shocked and even pleased at seeing this restored balance of nature coming back into major cities, I've seen pictures of Venice with the jellyfish and the fish and dolphins and all of this natural balance coming back into play. And I think if now's the time, if we're learning anything, and we're learning a lot about a lot of different things in this time of pandemic, what can we do to stay on this trend? What can we do to have good, healthy conversations? People can say this science is bad or that science is bad. What no one can deny is a high quality change of what's taking place in our local environments with the reduction of pollution from 30 to 50% and in some cases more. And so I'd like to talk to both of you because you both are experts and you're both very involved in these areas. Meryln, I guess we'll start with you. You've been at it since 1976. What are some of your observations and what are some of these outcomes you think we can continue to improve on?
Well, transportation is a significant part of different pollutant problems that we have. And so what we are seeing right now is dramatic reduction in traffic. And so that's reducing a lot of the different pollutants, whether it's from diesel trucks or gasoline cars, a lot of reduction. What I like to do though, just to kind of set the stage, if I could take a minute, Mark, is just there's kind of three different pollutant problems that have, and it's somewhat chronological. When you look back 50 years ago with the first Clean Air Act in the U.S., the focus was on 6 common pollutants, what they're called criteria pollutants, things like particulate matter, ozone, carbon monoxide, lead, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide. So those things were the 6 that were the focus back then. Then in 1990, a major new systematic approach was on air toxics. And that's continued until the present day as well. And then there's only since about 2007, 8, 9 has there been a more focus on climate change, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide. And that was a result of a Supreme Court decision during that time period, and then Environmental Protection Agency coming up with an endangerment finding that allowed EPA and the states and local agencies to regulate greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. But that chronology, back when I started, just to kind of illustrate, in the 70s, down in Medford in Southern Oregon, that area violated the national air quality health standards over half the days of the year for either ozone or carbon monoxide from automobiles in areas of traffic congestion, and particulate matter from a wide variety of sources, but home wood heating, wood products industry. So half the days of the year violated those standards. And on the worst days, it was over twice that health standard. And by 1992, 3, 4, the area was meeting standards for all of those common air pollutants called criteria pollutants. Back then, automobiles, the primary focus was on carbon monoxide and ozone. And we were hopeful in that time period that we'd see more electric cars. We knew there was a lot of development going on, and we were hoping that the future would have more electric vehicles, because in those areas of heavy traffic congestion, that would be basically zero emissions in those areas. Where the power is generated, there could be, if it's not from renewables, there would be a pollution in a more distant location. So transportation was the focus then. Now, transportation now, it's a lot of the air toxics like benzene that we're exposed to are from gasoline cars. A lot of things like diesel particulate matter or naphthalene come from diesel trucks. And so I am optimistic with now, it looks very promising with the wide availability of electric cars and more affordable electric cars, that's going to be producing results like what we're seeing right now, but on a more consistent basis into the future years. So anyway, just to kind of set the stage, I may come back and visit those 3 different areas when we're talking about different pollutant problems.
Mysti, would you like to add to that?
Oh, well, just I think from an activist point of view, when I was at the Climate Reality training with Al Gore's team, I was shocked to find out that personal vehicles, our cars, are a major contributor to carbon monoxide and pollutants. So, because kind of, when you see the smokestacks and, the big bellowing clouds coming out of the factories, or you're like, oh, that's easy to point at and say that that's like the #1 problem. And that it's too big for us to change anything. Me as an individual, I can't go up to, ExxonMobil or, be like, shut down, please. I don't like what you're doing. But just knowing that if all of we, the little people, take advantage of electric cars and cleaner ways of getting ourselves around, that we really can have a major impact on our climate. And another thing I wanted to throw out there is that there's a big movement right now, like when you're saying like, oh, there's a contrast there, like when this pandemic happened, there's like these amazing photos of the Himalayas that haven't been seen for 30 years, and what that means. And some people or some groups are saying like, well, it's because human beings are a virus, or this human beings need to be taken off the planet Earth because we're killing the planet. And I think this is a really dangerous message to send out to people out in the community. More often than not, it's minorities and communities of color. If anything if that message were to be amplified, would be the first to suffer. And we, of course, we don't want anybody to suffer or be targeted. But it's a very dangerous path to go down, to say that human beings are a virus and that we need to be eliminated off the planet in order to save the planet. But from my studies that I've done, I've come to understand also from growing up around indigenous tribes during my life. And now it's just people are paying more attention to indigenous teachings and how to have a relationship with nature that isn't so toxic and abusive. And now they're coming out, Western scientists are joining indigenous scientists with this knowledge that humans have a symbiotic relationship with nature. So they've done all these studies that they've removed humans from nature completely. There's like these sections on Earth that are no humans allowed, and what they're finding is that there's an imbalance there too. And so what indigenous people have been teaching for eons is that humans and nature rely on each other. And so when there's that a balance there, then things go well. So my point is that removing humans from nature isn't exactly going to give us the goal that we're looking for as well. So yeah, just I feel that the more that we look into indigenous teachings and tribal life, perhaps a community will be one of the major contributors to building a healthier future for our children.
Well, I think
And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So.
Thank you very much. You know, I think it's important in what you said, Mysti, that we are all part of, we can all choose to be a part of, with the right working knowledge, part of this grand ecosystem of life, and how we protect it and preserve it and care for it. Going back to what you were saying, Meryln, you know, I remember the pollution of the early 70s. I remember the rampant pollution of the early 70s prior to the EPA being approved. I thought a couple of things with regards to vehicles. I was just assuming that with improved gas mileages, smaller engines, that there was a lot of positive ground being made in regards to the amount or types of pollutants from vehicles that were being released. And with the increase of fossil fuels and home heating equipment, whether it's natural gas or oil or propane, and I know wood stoves have increased in efficiency as well, that has become a positive part of how we use those kinds of systems, uh, as well as when Clinton was president, and I remember his move towards more efficiency in the heating and ventilation cooling industry as well was very positive. The types of Freon, the SEER ratings, the requirement ratings that have made a massive impact in the industry as it stands today, which I think is also very good. So just listening to you, Meryln, it opened my mind to this entire scope of response mechanism that we've seen being developed, but also there's so much more that we don't know, we didn't know, we don't understand. And the whole purpose of this conversation today is help us to know more, understand more, and what are some of the legitimate possibilities we can have to maintain some of this positive movement towards a healthier environment.
Well, there has been tremendous progress, and when you look at, every year EPA will put out a progress report, and some of the trends are interesting to compare there. Pollution has improved, has decreased. The gross domestic product has increased faster than population growth. Mm. So the economy has grown and pollution has been reduced at the same time. So, when people say that you can't have both, with technological advances and basic fundamental commitments to cleaner air, we have seen progress even while the economy has continued to grow at a healthy rate. Mm-hmm. The one thing about automobiles, a new car today is 90-some% cleaner than it was back in the 60s. So there's no question that those pollution controls and cleaner fuels have made a big difference. One difference between gasoline vehicles and electric vehicles, though, is that gasoline vehicles will get dirtier as they get older. They require maintenance. The cars don't do as good a job keeping emissions down over time. They're still much cleaner than the counterpart aged vehicle back in the 1960s. But that's one thing, is they do deteriorate over time. Electric cars, on the other hand, actually get cleaner over time, and the reason is because there's not just the zero emissions from the vehicle itself, but there's also the electrical generation providing that. And if you look at the national trends of emissions from power plants, those have been going down steadily. Transition from coal to natural gas, much cleaner natural gas compared to the coal emissions, or additional controls have been put on as well. So the electricity providing the energy for those cars is actually going down over time. So some people like to have the simple solution for a better future is electrify everything. And that's not just cars, but that's also getting now to where it's trucks. It's also lawnmowers. It's also lawn equipment. Electrify everything and clean up the grid that's providing the electricity. And if we do both of those things, that will help ensure that we continue to have a cleaner, a better, more livable future.
Is that realistic? Just from a consumer standpoint, I don't know much about the industry. So, I mean, I know that we already have electric weed eaters. We do have electric cars. We have electric lawnmowers. I don't know if we have any electric buses yet here locally. I know some
Yes, we do.
have local electric buses. Um, is that realistic? I mean, it just seems like a big, massive required development. And do we have to develop our mindset as a nation before we do it, or develop it, in your estimation, as we go along and do both simultaneously?
Well, just since 2010 or so, when we've had commercially available electric cars. Let me talk about some of the changes there.
Okay.
There have been dramatic changes in the cost of batteries over that period of time. The lithium ion is kind of the current state of the art, but there's even newer technologies that are being rapidly pursued. But back in 2010, a typical car might get 80 miles of range on an electric charge, 80 to 100 miles. Now it's not uncommon to get over 300 miles of range. Part of that is the affordability of the battery. Part of that is increased density of the battery. So the technology is making it feasible for many more people to travel with electric cars. There's now a supercharger network across the US where you can take alternate routes across the country and go from one supercharger to another, recharge for 20 minutes, grab a cup of coffee, use the restroom, and be off again. The other thing is the cost. Now, electric cars are still more expensive on the front end, but if you look at the 5-year cost of ownership, like the basic Tesla Model 3, for example, compare that to the best-selling sedans right now, and it would be like a Camry, Toyota Camry, or a Honda Accord. If you compare the 5-year costs of ownership, the Tesla Model 3 wins. It's got a front-end cost a little bit higher, but when you look at the fuel cost, electricity is like, we're seeing some gas stations in the Midwest right now getting down to $1 a gallon. Well, that's what electric has been and will be in the future, is about $1 a gallon equivalent, even when gasoline prices go back up to $3 a gallon. So that and lower maintenance on the electric vehicles, all you have to do is look at that 5 years, and they're breaking even now. As developments continue to occur, electric cars are going to be cheaper. Now, that's for people that can afford to buy a new car. Now, there's a lot of new cars sold. I didn't buy my new car until 2013, and we were celebrating our 37th wedding anniversary when we bought our first new car. Used Toyotas had served as well. But since that time, it's dramatic just how much more affordable electric vehicles are. We have a lawnmower. We've had it it's a Ego that we got from Home Depot about 3 years ago. And it is such a delight to use. It's a little bit more to buy on the front end, but I haven't had to buy gasoline. I haven't had to change the oil on that. And it's been remarkably trouble-free for about 3 years now. And it's battery operated, just to charge it in up between mowings, and it's so I think we're if we're not there now, we're so rapidly getting there that when we had a conversation a year from now, we'd be able to say, hey, we've arrived.
Very good. Mysti, what did you learn in your training at the Climate Reality about the issues that we're talking about now, about regarding changing over from fossil fuels to a more electrically driven modes of transportation and service?
Well, Mr. Gore and his team did focus on converting to cleaner modes of transportation, cleaner energy, basically. But they really stress, like, we as individuals, yes, we can buy electric cars and, you know, recycle and pass rules reducing garbage waste. Like here in Eugene, we eliminated straws and plastic bags. But we're running out of time, and that's really the major issue right now, is that climate change and is accelerating and getting more and more dangerous and impactful on us every day all over the world. And so our little individual actions are important and helpful, but Mr. Gore strongly urges us to really pressure our elected officials and our politicians to get with it and to create laws and regulations that protect human health and the health of the planet. Because ultimately, if we destroy the planet, then of course we're destroying ourselves. So, but that's the quickest way to change, is to get our elected officials and politicians to get on board and make new regulations to clean up pollution, and have companies clean up their pollution themselves. You know, oftentimes companies, they leave their garbage, they pollute the area after they're done extracting whatever that they've extracted. They just leave their pollution and garbage in the area. I was in Alaska some years ago, and there are 100-year-old mining equipment all scattered all over the state that had just been abandoned by big mining operations. That's just an example. But I mean, they've been doing this for a very long time. And so requiring companies to clean up their garbage and or take care of their own waste. Imagine if we sent, you know, companies their garbage back to them. You know, so have them deal with their own plastic garbage. You know, how quickly would they change if all of a sudden they had mountains of plastic garbage around their facilities? How quickly they would change to another, you know, biodegradable product. But those are just some things that we can do. I kind of like that kind of grassroots stuff. But really, our elected officials, if they are allowed to, if we elect officials that are you know, green savvy and are aware of climate change issues and believe in it, believe in scientists and science, that's very important, then they are likely to vote in favor of bills that support, you know, climate issues. We've been fighting for our clean energy jobs bill like every year now here in the state of Oregon, and the Republican Party had to abandon and flee the state. I mean, that's how intense this issue is. But yeah, that's really the number one thing, is elect officials right now as soon as possible.
How about some ancillary questions for the both of you? Meryln, I'll go back to you first. So if someone gets a electric vehicle and they want to bring it home, what kind of preparations do they need to have in their home in order to have an electric vehicle, get it set up to be recharged overnight in their home? What would that require? Do you know?
Yes, from personal experience, that first new car ever we purchased was an electric car. We were just so impressed by the barriers they were overcoming that's what we chose to do. I sometimes joke that it delayed my retirement by doing so, because especially back in 2013, the front end cost was significantly more than a gasoline vehicle. But the nice thing about electric vehicles is that virtually every home in the United States is powered by electricity. And so most people drive about, it's about 40 miles or less on average that the average person does, you could actually plug your car into a 110 volt outlet in your garage and it would charge enough for your next day's driving. Now, if you want to be able to prepare for longer trips, then what we did in our garage, we put a 240 volt RV plug. It's similar to like a dryer plug, but it's standard place in the box for wiring it in. I had my brother-in-law helped me with it, so it was a couple $100 of materials to run the conduit and the wiring and the new circuit breaker out to the front of the garage. And that will, if you have a vehicle that say will go 250 miles of range, and you come in empty at night, 8 hours on that will be full the next day. So that's what some of the electric vehicle owners, manufacturers recommend, is that you do an RV plug, 240 volt system. But let me say also, my brother-in-law who helped me with ours, he's an electrician, and he when he bought an electric car, his wife was driving it round trip to U of O campus, and he didn't feel the need to add a 240 volt plug. Her driving was in that typical 40, 50 miles of range, even with errands. And so they just plugged that in at night. And even though it would be easy and inexpensive with his skills to do it, he never felt the need to do anything other than the 110 wall outlet that was already there in the garage.
What is the average life of the batteries in these electric vehicles? And if they die, what's the disposal recommendation?
Well, on our car, our 2013 car, we've got about 130,000 miles on it in that 7 or so years, 7 or 8 years now. And it's degraded about 10% over that time period. I expect by the time we need to recycle that battery, it may have a second life. One thing that people are, that's probably not ideal for a car.
Oh, you're
But
breaking
that
up.
may be great for a home to give you, that may be great for your home to take you through a power outage where you can go down to just the essentials for a few days and get through a power outage. Or if you have a solar panels on your roof, that may be something that would provide the storage to allow best optimum use of your solar system. But I expect that battery recycling will be well advanced by that time. One thing that it's important to recognize is that the batteries, starting batteries in cars now, the lead acid batteries, that's probably the most recycled material of any. It's 90-some% of lead acid batteries get recycled, so you don't have the emissions related to producing that lead and the acids again. So primarily the lead would be the concern, but that's a fairly high percentage recycled. I would expect electric vehicle batteries to approach very similar numbers when the time comes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say that regarding, Mysti, you used a term earlier, green technology. And I know that the building trades, the Home Builders Association has a lot of builders, commercial and residential, who have moved towards green technology resources, green built homes, a lot of different, with HVAC and vehicles. You used the term, Mysti, we're running out of time. If there is no, I know there's been this proposal of the new Green Deal, excuse me. Sorry, it's kind of that old Texas accent kind of came out of me, but you know, by 2050 they wanted all fossil fuels to no longer be part of the usage mechanism. Is that correct? If that's it, let's talk about that in two ways. One, if that doesn't happen, have we made enough progress, and is there enough development going on within the fossil fuel industry? Let me say that, change that. The technology and how we use fossil fuels, whether in HVAC or vehicles, efficiency ratings keep going up. They're pretty good ratings these days, and furnaces, you name it. If we don't get to the 20, if that's not approved, if the government says, no, that's unrealistic, and we stay improving the technologies of fossil fuels, does that, from you know, the opinion of the science on that side, is 2050 too late? Will we implode even if we're making all of these continued advancements? And or if it is approved and we get to 2050 and it's approved, how would we fly? What about boats? What about planes? What about all the fossil fuel driven transportation systems now? How do we recycle those? What would happen? Just out of curiosity, because I don't know.
Oh, I mean, I think nobody really knows what's going to happen. I mean, they said we had a lot more time. Just 5-10 years ago, they said we had more time to deal with this issue, and all of a sudden now we have 10 years, and now we have, you know, it's always changing. But what we do know is that climate is getting worse, and that human beings have had a major impact, and the science has shown that carbon emissions is part of the reason for the big change. And so obviously reducing carbon is the goal, right? The just natural go to how to fix the problem. But really the problem is, you know, capitalism and the whole idea of constantly having to grow in order for there to be a positive effect. You know, like the whole idea that we have to consume more in order for the economy to be healthy, or for us as a whole society to be healthy, is to consume more capital, you know, more capital, more growth. And so when you're talking about like switching over to electric vehicles, we have to still keep in mind that even though the batteries could be recycled, etc., we are still mining for all of those materials. We're still extracting materials to obtain those cars, regardless if they're cleaner or not. So hopefully the goal, I think, and the vision for the future is to reduce the amount of consumption on a just generally overall, and to, yes, recycle what we've used so far, but just generally abstract less from the planet, drill less, mine less for those basic components that we use every day that are rather detrimental and toxic way of extracting materials, etc. But yes, one of the things that I've been learning in school, and that has actively been talked about in cities across Oregon and the United States, are reducing traffic, helping people get out of their cars and use public transportation, and stop building like suburban communities, and instead build smart cities. So instead of having, let's say, low-wage workers that make $15 an hour working for Starbucks, they can't necessarily pay you know, a rent that's $12,000 a month, but they have to travel like 2 hours to get to that job at the Starbucks, you know. So the idea is to build communities that have integrated housing, so people have to travel less to get to where they need to go, which means less cars on the road, less traffic, less congestion. So that's really what the future is looking like. We've hit quite a bit of speed bumps along the road. I'm not sure if you've seen that Portland had those scooters that they've been trying to implement, and some people were throwing them in the river because basically they didn't like that they had pedestrians had to share the walkway, the sidewalk with the people that were on the scooters, but the people on the scooters need a place to ride their scooters because obviously the road is not a safe place. They don't feel safe on the actual road. And so we lack the infrastructure, and that's where we come into like building our smart cities. If we're going to want people to get out of their cars and use alternative transportations, then we need to build the infrastructure to allow that to happen.
Okay,
So
Meryln,
smart cities in the future, hopefully.
Meryln, did you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I would agree with Mysti that ideally, you know, with better planning and some of these behavior changes, more biking, more walking, more transit use, that we're going to have more livable communities, smarter cities. But I may be putting too much emphasis on the technology, but there's a number of things that I consider good news on that front. In fact, I got kind of a closing good news, bad news story, Mark, if I could, on the elected officials front. You know, I think Mysti and I share a lot of concerns there that it's important that people be making wise decisions where they're looking at all the costs involved, not just the immediate or not just the internal costs, but that the elected officials are making wise decisions. So part of the bad news for me this past few years has been the rollback on two key fronts. You know, cleaner transportation is important, and cleaner power plants is important. Power plants, coal burning, primarily, you know, Midwest, East Coast, we're not as affected directly by that, although I think we still currently get some of our electricity from coal burning and coal from Utah, Wyoming, those areas. But the two bad news things for me are the rollback on clean car standards that's just happened here recently. You know, we were projected to get, even though we've made the dramatic improvements we have already, another 5% a year on average is what we were expecting to get from those programs. And now it was going to be 0. It looks like it might be 1% in the final version. That's a setback. That's the bad news. On the Clean Power Plan, there was a blueprint for how to systematically reduce emissions from power generation across the country, and that has been pushed back. It's called now the Affordable Clean Energy, but it really is not as effective as it would be. Those are the two bad things, and I think Mysti and I would share concerns on both of those fronts. But the good news is electric vehicles, the advancements there, specifically the battery technology, costs coming down, the density going up of the energy those batteries contain, the ductless heat pumps. Just several years ago, that wasn't very practical, but now that for communities impacted by wood stove emissions like Oak Ridge or Eugene Springfield, those are a very cost-effective way to maybe not eliminate the wood use in a home, but certainly dramatically reduce it to just the few coldest days. And the other front is low-cost consumer sensors. Now, the federal reference method stations we have, we're proud that we've got 7, which is probably about 7 times as many as a comparable area like Salem would have. But those 7 stations the instruments there cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now there are units available for about $250. And we have deployed a number of those at schools and residences throughout our area. So those 7, we first started by co-locating so we could compare them to our federal reference method stations. But now we've got 40 or more that are spread out there. Most of them are ones we helped with, but individual residents have also invested in those. And when you have wildfire impacts like we had in 2017, people really want to know what's the air quality right now. What precautions do I need to take? Is it better to be inside or outside? And I think these low-cost sensors are going to be a tremendous tool for everyone to better understand what's happening and what they can do.
Well, you just mentioned something that I wanted to talk a little bit more that also Mysti mentioned. Part of the arguments are, Mysti mentioned you're mining for that technology, you're mining the earth to create these electric vehicles. And so some say that, well, that's just as destructive as making a fossil fuel vehicle. I don't know. Those are just some of the, check this real quick. Let me check my internet connection.
Oops,
Can you hear me?
please restate your question again.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking my internet connection. I was trying to say that you mentioned having to mine for the vehicles to create them. And I know that some people say, well, that's just as toxic to the earth, that's just as damaging to the earth, that's just as damaging to long term. And then there's this low cost, I'm sorry, I lost my thought there, but this is the deal. We know pollution was rampant in this country. I can't speak for all the rest of the world, how bad it was in other societies, but we know it was bad. We know that before the EPA, pollution was out of control. And we know that with the addition of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the federal government, a lot of that changed. And I for one believe that because I've seen, especially in the HVAC field, heating, ventilation, and cooling field, the building trades, and moving towards more and more green technologies, efficiency of fossil fuel burning. I felt like we were making some decent progress and some good progress, honestly. And I felt like with the increase of mile per gallon in vehicles, that meant those little motors, the engines were becoming more and more efficient. And then in the midst of this pandemic, all these photos coming in from all over the world of what clean air really looks like over some of the most polluted areas that were created, whether it's because of the amount of population, whatever those contributing factors were, it really caught not just my attention, but I had to stop and think, Mysti, what, like you said earlier, the world we're leaving behind, the world we're gifting to the next generation, what are we gifting to society long term? And that's when I realized we better continue to be as proactive as possible to make this kind of difference. If everything goes electric, I agree, Mysti, you're right, nobody knows. What does that mean to our supply chains? How do we get food from here to there, resources from here to there? Does that mean flying is eliminated? Does that mean waterways are no longer utilized to move things around the earth? I'm sure that all those are really big questions that will get figured out along the way. But I think we're really onto something as a world community and a world society, and that we have, again, and I just want to say, I'm not anti-fossil fuel. I thought we were making really good progress until I saw all these pictures of our world system cleaning up, and then it made me realize that I think we're still doing something really wrong, or areas that we can really, really improve in. And so, there's just so many things that can be argued. There are so many things that can be disputed. But what cannot be argued against and what cannot be disputed against is what we're seeing in the midst of this pandemic, in the natural balance of our societies and nature being restored because of the lack of emissions. And that is really why I wanted to speak with the both of you today. And I wanted other people to really consider, as we move forward, to be stewards of the earth and move forward to be stewards of our society, that can we really in good conscience go back to the massive consumption and consumerism that was destroying everything in the first place. I know I'm kind of on a soapbox there, but that's how what we're seeing in the world has been reshaping my mindset.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of liberating to get on the soapbox a little bit and voice our concerns, especially about what we've all been seeing happen around us. I've definitely noticed more people walking and riding bikes instead of driving. And I've been telling folks, like, pay attention to the fact that we can survive without our cars, and we are able to walk and ride our bikes and still live life in a generally, pleasant, comfortable state. And so, and what you were saying about, oh, now I lost my track. But yes, the impact of really capitalism and then now, like, globalization, and how our world has become somewhat smaller by allowing this, with our economy, having a globalized economy, allowing our big industries here in the US with these free trade agreements in the past. Maybe future free trade agreements will take these things into consideration, but in the past have allowed companies to move into other countries where they don't have strict regulations and rules and human health concerns. And so, yeah, we see less of that here in the States, but other countries in the global South are not doing so well, for example. And so we're seeing these pictures of, oh, the Himalayas, like in India. It's a very polluted area of the world, and a lot of those companies are either from China or the US, global superpowers coming into their countries with their pollution. One thing I also wanted to add is that when we are upgrading our systems and we're voting in new regulations, and to not forget to always understand that there are winners and losers with any big change, right? Or any big regulation or rule, there's winners and losers. And so we always, Mark, I know you are a leader in the community, and to always remember that usually the losers in any new big change are low income communities of color and indigenous people. So if we start reducing, for example, here in Eugene, they've started reducing the amount of parking spaces, or you have to pay for parking. Well, anyone that's low income that needs a car, who perhaps lives way out of town because they can't pay for the very expensive rent, they have to drive into town, and then they have to pay $12, to park a day. And they have probably kids that they have to drop off at school too. So basically the idea is to reduce the amount of parking spaces, so people will be forced into getting out of their cars and using buses. But it's more nuanced than that, and people of low income generally are impacted the harshest with these new rules. And so keep that in mind when we're putting together our smart cities, that we have to take all people into consideration and make sure everyone has a way that it doesn't impact the lowest low income people and working class folks the most.
Mhm.
I think that we would have more success in implementing changes like this if we had those safeguards in place and made them known that they were also not left behind in the dust to bear the grunt of the big changes.
Yeah, I think that's legitimate, Misty. People struggling to afford rents and struggling to afford a vehicle payment and struggling to afford parking and insurance and all of those things. It can be quite the demand. So thank you for mentioning that. Meryln, any thing you wanted to add about some of my comments? I know they were kind of broad.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to recognize there's been tremendous progress, especially here in the US, but there's also much more room for improvement. The job isn't done. So I think some of the more dramatic illustrations of what you were commenting on were India, China, views of the Himalayas, for example. I think that illustrates the progress we've made in the US. But even when you look at LA, when you shut down most of the vehicle traffic, you see that there's tremendous room for improvement. Those are probably the cleanest cars even in the US because of the pressures in California for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's still much room for improvement even in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I didn't even consider that till you said that they do have some of the most restrictive, for good reason, the most restrictive laws around emissions because of the density and the amount of the population, and to consider that there's still that much pollution. And even seeing pictures of the Riverwalk in downtown San Antonio, and to see the water cleared up and it's blue, and it's just been really really made me question, how well we're taking care of, not just ourselves, but our nature, the society of nature, this ecosystem that we all belong to. We may not always want to consider that, but it is a massive responsibility, and we're gonna, there's a next generation behind us that's going to be counting on us to make good decisions. So with that said, Meryln, before we go, any final comments that you'd like to make to the public about, what are some of the considerations that we should be thinking about as citizens in our local communities about pollution or any of those other areas of efficiencies?
Well, I would reinforce some of the things Mysti has said, that each of us individually, there are a lot of things we can do in our daily choices, doing, if walking and biking or transit or choices. If our home, we can operate our home cleaner, that, there's a lot that we can do, but then also voting for people that will make this a more livable community. Those are also things that are important.
Very good. And Misty, any final words you'd like to say to the community at large about our need to make sure we're being good stewards of our climate and our nature?
Just one last thing. As a community organizer and mother, one of the major issues that sometimes isn't talked about because it's not very sexy, but there is a lot of despair around the issue of climate change. And I think a lot of people are heartbroken, and there's not a lot of, areas where we can really talk about how heavy and devastating this feeling is for a lot of people. So really being there for each other, especially during this time, and we've all learned during this pandemic, realize how important our community, our families, our friends are to each other, and and how much I've seen people are kinder to each other too during this time. It's really heartwarming. And so the message of hope is very important, and not to lose hope, I think, is vital during this time, and to not stay just stagnant and stuck in this feeling of hopelessness and fear, and that knowing that we can make a big impact on our current situation and our future situation by coming together and supporting one another, I think is very important. And also, I just want to also just, you know, we have made big changes, but those big changes have happened through regulations. Big companies aren't going to change just on their own. They're having a good time making lots of profit, and they're probably not going to change just on their own. They have to be forced to. And we do that through rules and regulations. And for example, the ozone layer, the ozone hole has shrunk, and that's due to regulations that reduced chemicals in spray cans, etc., the CFC chemicals. And so we know that we can make a positive impact on our Earth if we reduce some activities. And we could do that by, you know, supporting each other and you know, caring for one another.
Very good. You know, we just celebrated Earth Day. I'm just going to make a statement here. We just celebrated Earth Day, and I think that we all like to go out and go for walks, and people like to go camping and fishing, and people like to enjoy nature. And more so now than ever, I think people are really beginning to understand the importance of that. And because of what we're seeing, I think we need to start having really important conversations with one another as to why we need to change, why things can't necessarily go back to the way they were in every area or every way, and what are some of the positive outcomes we can continue to build upon to make our communities, our societies, and even the world ecosystem, and that's what it is with the global community, it's a world ecosystem, a much better place to live. And you know, for those that might watch us later, they might have big questions about manufacturing or many of those other things. No answers here. I didn't ask the two of you to come on here to address these really big problems, but Jess, I wanted both of you to bring your expertise and your awareness to how we can continue to improve and acknowledge some of those improvements, but also how we can be better. So in this interview, we've had again Meryln Hough, Director of Lane Regional Air Protection Agency, and Mysti Frost, Community Organizer, Activist, and Mom in working with the arena of air pollution and climate change. I want to thank you both for your willingness to speak with me on this issue today, and for your willingness to share your insights and your knowledge, and they're both legitimate in both cases. And if you have if anyone that's viewing these has any other questions for either one of them, you can reach Meryln at LRAPA, and you can reach out to Mysti. Mysti, if someone wants to talk about getting involved with what you're doing, how can they do that?
Well, they could shoot you a message, and you can forward their question to me, or my email address is mystifrost2030@gmail.com.
Very good. And so Meryln, we have your information as well. If anyone has any questions, we can forward that to you at LRAPA. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope both of you have a very good day and a good week.
Thank you, Mark,
Thanks,
for having us. This was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Bye.
Bye-bye.